Because, of course, what you have in modern Western societies is the extreme powerlessness of the individual. The individual can feel, apart from maybe in consumption and expenditure of cash, the average individual feels totally cut off from the external society. It's what I call deep privatisation. Privatisation in the 1980s and the 1990s meant the disbursement of public utilities and was a sort of Thatcherite and neoliberal ideology. But privatisation has actually gone much deeper than that. It's the view that each is out for himself, and society hardly exists beyond the confines of one's own family, one's own extended family, and people that one happens to know. And people feel not just sort of deracinated, but depopularised and de-democratised, if there are such terms. And people are, in extraordinary sense, alone. Alone with the television, alone with the telescreen, which when they flick from channel to channel, tells them all the time that everything is perfect, and there are only nasty-minded people who will stir things up as vanguards and various forms of extremism. Extremism, of course, is something always to be rejected, but I think extremism is necessary. I think it's socially and mathematically necessary, because there has to be a logic to the logic of logic. There has to be something which takes the argument out to the furthest point on the circle. In maths, if you have a curve, you have a line that penetrates it at the furthest extent. And I believe that there has to be a logic that, in the realms of sanity and within the realms of what's possible, bisects the line at the most radical point. And that's what the people in this room are. That's what vanguard forms of identity amount to. They are the most radical manifestation of the implicit sense of becoming and belonging and identitarian man and womanhood of the ordinary people in one's own group. And you have to manifest that, and you have to represent it. And only by doing so can you have a certain effect, because you do have an effect by virtue of existing. There are many other groups on this planet who always ask a question when anything happens: is it good for us? Is it good for us, or is it bad for the others? But most people think, actually, is it good for us? Far more people, even of a more vanguard or elitist temperament, are prone to say, is it good for us, rather than is it bad for the others? Because contrary to liberals, who always think that positions of identity are based on the idea of doing others down, principles of identity are usually based on boosting, or to use an ugly contemporary phrase, bigging up one's own group. People actually think more positively about themselves than they do before they get into negativity about others. Contrary to the view that politics of identity is all about negativity towards others. And as long as you can suppress that through political correctness, everyone can live happily in a multi-cult, a multi-identity firmament, or melting pot. I think the point to make about vanguardism is whenever anything happens, people in other groups, and people in other vanguards, and liberal humanists in our own group, because the previous speaker said quite truthfully that it is indigenous liberals who are our real enemy. Indigenous liberals are always the enemy. Liberalism within ourselves is always the enemy. It exists even in people who regard themselves as radical to a certain extent. We've had liberalism in an uninterrupted way for centuries. Russia's never known a liberal regime. And whether one likes it or not, the politics of contemporary Russia have a lot to do with the fact that they've never known a period of liberalism. You could argue that since the restoration of the monarchy in the 1600s, we've known nothing but various forms of liberalism, most of which link to various elements of the Protestant religion during that time. But until about the 1950s or 60s, most forms of Protestantism retained residual, illiberal and patriotic ideas, as for a period they did in a very sectarian way in Northern Ireland. So all views have their liberal side. Even our liners have their liberal side, which they have to guard against, and guard against chipping away at them. Liberalism also feeds on indifference, and indifference to the future, and indifference to the generations that are coming in the future. But vanguardism is something different, because it lives for the virility of what might be in the future. And make no bones about it, what Vanguard Caucasians think about their future is watched and is listened to by liberals and by all the other groups. So the idea that what we do and what we say and what we think has no relevance or no purport is not true. What is true is that competition between groups is part of the stuff of life. And the contemporary society is based upon the formulation that that is not the case. And because it is the case, nature will trump all of the liberal arguments. The problem is that if it doesn't take a political form, nature's trumping of liberalism will be a very painful process to live through. A very painful process for ourselves, for everybody, and for all other persons in other groups. That is why we have to continue with putting forward, passively, the politics of identity from our own standpoint.